Coming back for some brand new breaking news. MS Now has just learned that FBI Director Kash Patel may be out of a job in the coming months. 3 people with knowledge of the situation say President Trump and his top aides have grown tired of Patel and the unflattering headlines he's been generating recently, including using a government jet to visit his girlfriend and enlisting a SWAT team.
When White House starts leaking stories like this, it usually means something behind the scenes is already falling apart. Not just one scandal, not just one headline, but a pattern. A pattern of officials leaving, being pushed out, or suddenly finding themselves on very thin ice. And now, another major resignation has just added to that pattern. One of the most important economic officials in the entire federal government has suddenly quit. No long goodbye, no transition period, just packed up his office and walked out. Which raises a very uncomfortable question. Why are so many people suddenly leaving this administration at the same time? Because when senior officials start heading for the exits all at once, it usually means the people inside the building are seeing something the rest of the country hasn't noticed yet. So let's break down what actually happened here. Because this story isn't just about one resignation. It's about what happens when the people running the government start disappearing.
And MS Now White House reporter Laura Barone-Lopez, both of them broke this story along with Carol Leonnig. Ken.
Well, Katie, I should say, first of all the qualifiers apply here. With Donald Trump and personnel decisions, you never actually know exactly what's going on. But we are being told that Kash Patel, the FBI director, is on increasingly thin ice.
That phrase right there is doing a lot of work. On increasingly thin ice. In Washington, that's usually code for something very specific. It means the political knives are already out. And it means someone inside the administration has started leaking information to the press. Because that's how these things normally unfold. First, the headlines appear. Then the speculation grows. And eventually, someone is either fired or forced to resign. But while that story was unfolding at the FBI, something else happened that received far less attention. Yet it might be even more important. Because one of the most powerful economic officials in the entire White House just resigned. Immediately. No transition, no delay, just gone. The person who left is Stephen Moran. Most Americans probably don't recognize that name, but inside Washington, his job was extremely important. Moran was the chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. That position is essentially the president's top economic brain, the person responsible for analyzing data, tracking inflation, evaluating interest rates, and advising the president on policies that affect everything from jobs to housing prices. In other words, when the president wants to know what's actually happening in the economy, this is the person who explains it. And now, that person is suddenly gone. Now, government officials resign all the time. Cabinet members step down. Advisors move on. That part isn't unusual. But the way this resignation happened is what caught people's attention. Because Moran didn't leave after a long transition. He didn't announce a future departure date. He didn't even wait for a replacement. He simply stepped down immediately. And according to reports, he said he was leaving to honor a promise he made to the Senate during a confirmation hearing. On paper, that explanation sounds reasonable. But political insiders know something important. People rarely leave one of the most powerful economic jobs in government over a technical promise. Not unless something else is going on. And when you zoom out and look at the broader picture, a pattern begins to appear. Because Moran is not the first senior official to leave this administration. Not even close. Over the past year, a long list of experienced officials has either resigned, been pushed out, or quietly disappeared from government roles. National security staff, legal advisors, policy directors, career experts who have worked under multiple presidents, Republican and Democrat. People who normally stay in government regardless of which party is in power. And many of them are now gone. Some resigned voluntarily, others were reportedly fired, and some were told behind closed doors that their services were no longer needed. But many of the departures seem to have one thing in common. These officials weren't seen as sufficiently loyal. Not loyal to the country, not loyal to the Constitution, but loyal to the president personally. And that distinction matters, because running a government requires expertise. Economists, lawyers, national security analysts, career prosecutors, people who understand how the machinery of government actually works. But when loyalty becomes the primary requirement for staying in the room, something else begins to happen. The experts start leaving. And the people who remain are often the ones most willing to agree with whatever the boss says, even when the data says something different, even when the policy might be risky, even when someone should probably speak up and say, maybe this isn't a good idea. Nowhere has that dynamic been more visible than inside the Department of Justice. According to multiple reports, the DOJ has experienced an extraordinary wave of departures. Career prosecutors with decades of experience have left the department. Some had spent 20 or 30 years building cases against organized crime networks, corruption rings, and financial criminals. And that experience didn't disappear gradually. It vanished almost overnight. Reporters described it as an exodus that erased centuries of combined experience from the department. Think about that for a second. Centuries of knowledge. Gone. Those weren't political appointees. They weren't campaign staff. They were career professionals. The people responsible for keeping federal law enforcement running, regardless of who occupies the White House. And when those people leave, the consequences can ripple through the entire system. Investigations slow down, institutional knowledge disappears, and new staff members often have to rebuild expertise that took decades to develop. Now bring that back to the Moran resignation. Because losing your top economic advisor during a fragile economic moment is not just embarrassing. It can also be risky. Right now, the American economy is dealing with several major challenges. Inflation has been stubborn, interest rates remain high, housing prices are unstable, and consumer confidence has been shaky. At a moment like that, the last thing most presidents want is uncertainty inside their economic team. Yet that's exactly what just happened. The person responsible for coordinating economic policy is gone, and no replacement has been announced yet. All of this is happening while political pressure on the administration is already increasing. Recent polling has shown growing concerns among voters about government stability. Many Americans say they're worried about the level of turnover inside the administration. And every time another senior official resigns, those concerns grow stronger. Because voters may not follow every policy debate, but they do notice when the people running the government keep leaving. Members of Congress are noticing it too. Republicans privately worry about the political damage these departures could cause, but many remain reluctant to criticize the administration publicly. Democrats, on the other hand, have seized on the issue. They're framing the wave of resignations as evidence of chaos inside the government, and they're preparing to make it a major talking point in upcoming elections. Because politically, nothing fuels campaign ads faster than stories about instability and resignations. But beyond the politics, there's a deeper question that people inside Washington are quietly asking. Why are so many experienced officials leaving? Because when experts walk away from powerful government positions, it's rarely random. Sometimes they leave for better opportunities. Sometimes they retire. But when departures start happening in clusters, it can signal something else. A workplace environment that has become difficult. A leadership structure that discourages disagreement. Or a government where the people with the most experience no longer feel they can do their jobs effectively. And that brings us back to the story we started with. Reports that the FBI director himself may be on thin ice. Another senior resignation. And a growing list of officials heading for the exits. Individually, each of these stories might seem manageable, but taken together, they create a much bigger picture. A government that appears to be losing experienced officials faster than it can replace them. And if that pattern continues, the question won't just be who left. The real question will be who's still left running the place. Because when the most experienced people in government start leaving all at once, history shows that something inside the building is already going very wrong. And the rest of the country usually finds out about it only after it's too late.